Chapter 7 of The Galaxy Primes by Doc Smith. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Galaxy Primes, Chapter 7. Since everyone, including the ebullient Kamoff, slept late the following morning, they all had brunch instead of breakfast and lunch. All during the meal, Garlock was preoccupied and stern. "Hold everything for a while, Jim," he said when everyone had eaten. "Before we move, Bell and I have got to have a conference." "Not a Fatso Ferber 9 o'clock type, I hope." James frowned in mock reproach, and Kamoff Flournoy cocked an eyebrow in surprise. "Monkey business on company time is only for big shots like him, not for small fries such as you." "Well, it won't be exclusively monkey business anyway. While we're gone, you might clear with the control tower and take us up into takeoff position. Come on, Bell." He took her by one elbow and led her away. "Why, Dr. Garlock!" Mincing along beside him, pretending high reluctance, she looked up at him wide-eyed. "I'm surprised. I really am. I'm shocked, too. I'm not that kind of a girl, and if I wasn't afraid of losing my job, I would scream. I never even suspected that you would use your position as my boss to force your unwelcome attentions on a poor and young and innocent and suffering—" Inside his room, Garlock, who had been grinning, sobered down and checked every Gunther block, a most unusual proceeding. Bell stopped joking in the middle of the sentence. "Yeah, how you suffer," he said. "I was just checking to be sure we're prime-proof. I'm not ready for Deggy Delcamp yet. That guy, Bell, as you probably noticed, has got one god-awful load of stuff. Not as much as you have, Clee, nor as much push behind what he has got. And his shield wouldn't make patches for yours." "Huh? How are you sure of that?" "I'm positive. I'm the one who is going to get bumped, I'm afraid. That foul Talaho is a hard-hitting, hard-boiled hellcat on wheels." "I'll be damned. You're wrong. I checked her from stem to gudgeon, and you lay over her like a circus tent. What's the answer?" "Oh, do I? I'm mighty glad. Funny both of us being wrong. It must be, Clee, that it's sex-based differences. We're used to each other, but neither of us has ever felt a prime of the same sex before, and there must be more differences between ops and primes than we realized. Suppose?" "Could be, I hope. But that doesn't change the fact that we aren't ready. We haven't got enough data. If we start out with this grandiose galactic service thing and find only 2 or 3 planets Gunthered, we make jackasses of ourselves. On the other hand, if we start out with a small organization or none and find a lot of planets, it'll be one continuous catfight. On the third hand, 3 hands, Clee? What are you, an octopussy or an arpalone? Keep your beautiful trap shut a minute. On the third hand, we've got to start somewhere. Any ideas?" "I never thought of it that way. I see." She thought for a minute, then went on. "We'll have to start without starting, then. Quite a trick. But how about this? Suppose we take a fast tour, with you and I taking quick peeks without the peekees ever knowing we've been peeking." "That's using the brain, Bell. Let's go." Then, out in the main. "Jim, we want to hit a few high spots, as far out as you can reach without losing orientation. Beta Centauri here is pretty bright. Rigel and Canopus are real lanterns. With those 3 as a grid, you could reach 1,500 or 2,000 light-years, couldn't you?" "More than that. That many parsecs at least." "Good. Bell and I want to make a fast, random sampling check of primes and ops around here. We'll need 5 minutes at each planet, quite a ways out. So, set up as big a globe as you can and still be dead sure of your locations. Then sample it." "Not enough data. How many samples do you want?" "As many as we can get in the rest of today. 6 or 7 hours, say. 8 hours max." "Call it 7. Brownie on the guns, me on compy. 5 minutes for you. I should be able to lock down the next shot in 5. 1 minute extra, say, for safety factor. That'd be 10 an hour. 70 planets enough? That'll be fine. Okay, we're practically at number 1 now. And James and Lola donned their scanners, ready for the job. Miss Flournoy, Garlock said, you might tell Mr. Entlor that we're— Oh, I already have, sir. You don't have to come along, of course, if you'd rather stay here. Stay here, sir? Why, he'd kill me. I'm off the air for a minute. This last thought was a conspiratorial whisper. Besides, do you think I'd miss a chance to be the first person, and just a girl, too, of a whole world to see other planets of other suns? Unless, of course, you invite Mr. Entlor and Mr. Holson along. They're both simply dying to go, I know, but, of course, won't admit it. You'd be just as well pleased if I didn't? What do you think, sir? We'll be working at top speed, and they'd be very much in the way, so they'll get theirs later, after you've licked the cream off the top of the— Ready to roll, Clee, James announced. Roll. Why, I lost contact, Miss Flournoy exclaimed. Naturally, Garlock said. Did you expect to cover a distance it takes light thousands of years to cross? You can record anything you see in the plates. You can talk to Jim or Lola any time they'll let you. Don't bother Miss Bellamy or me from now on. Garlock and Bell went to work. All 4 Galaxians worked all day, with half an hour off for lunch. They visited 70 planets and got back to Margonia in time for a very late dinner. Comoff Flournoy had less than a quarter of 1 roll of recorder tape left unused, and the primes had enough information to start the project they had in mind. And shortly after dinner, all 5 retired. In one way, Clee, I'm relieved, Bell pondered. But I can't figure out why all the primes, the grown-up ones I mean, on all the worlds are just about the same cantankerous, you-be-damned, out-and-out stinkers as you and I are. How does that fit into your theory? It doesn't. Too fine a detail. My guess is, at least it seems to me to make sense, it's because we haven't had any competition strong enough to smack us down and make Christians out of us. I don't know what a psychologist would say. And I know exactly what you'd think of whatever he did say, so you don't need to tell me. Bell laughed and presented her lips to be kissed. Good night, Clee. Good night, Ace. And the next morning, early, Garlock and Bell teleported themselves, by arrangement and appointment of course, across almost the full width of a nation and into the private office in which Deggy Delcamp and Phao Talaho awaited them. For a time which would not have been considered polite in Tellurian social circles, the 4 primes stood still, each couple facing the other with blocks set tight, studying each other with their eyes. Delcamp was, as Garlock had said, a big bruiser. He was shorter and heavier than the Tellurian. Heavily muscled, splendidly proportioned, he was a man of tremendous physical as well as mental strength. His hair, clipped close all over his head, was blond. His eyes were a clear, keen, cold, dark blue. Phao Talaho was a couple of inches shorter than Bell, and a good 15 pounds heavier. She was in no sense fat, however, or even plump. Actually, she was almost lean. She was wider and thicker than was the Earth woman, with heavier bones forming a wider and deeper frame. She, too, was beautifully, yes, spectacularly built. Her hair, fully as thick as Bell's own and worn in a free-falling bob 3 or 4 inches longer than Bell's, was bleached almost white. Her eyes were not really speckled, nor really mottled, but were regularly patterned in lighter and darker shades of hazel. She was, Garlock decided, a really remarkable hunk of woman. Both Nargottians wore sandals without either socks or stockings. Both were dressed, insofar as they were dressed at all, in yellow. Phao's single garment was of a thin, closely knitted fabric, elastic and sleek. Above the waist it was neckless, backless, and almost frontless. Below it was a very short, very tight and clinging skirt. Delcamp wore a sleeveless jersey and a pair of almost legless shorts. Garlock lowered his shield enough to send and to receive a thin layer of superficial thought. Delcamp did the same. "So far, I like what I see," Garlock said then. "We are well ahead of you. Hence, I can help you a lot if you want me to, and if you want to be friendly about it. If you don't, on either count, we leave now. Fair enough?" "Fair enough. I, too, like what I have seen so far. We need help, and I appreciate your offer. Thanks immensely. I can promise full cooperation and friendship for myself and for most of our group, and I assure you that I can and will handle any non-cooperation that may come up." "Nicely put, Diggy." Garlock smiled broadly and let his guard down to a comfortable leaping level. "I was going to bring that up. The faster it's cleared, the better. Belle and I are paired. Some day, unless we kill each other first, we may marry. However, I'm no bargain, and she's 1/3 wildcat, 1/3 vixen, and 1/3 cobra. How do you two stand?" "You took the thought right out of my own mind. Your custom of pairing is not what you call urbane on this world. Nevertheless, Fow and I are paired. We had to. No one else has ever interested either of us. No one else ever will. We should not fight, but we do, furiously. But no matter how vigorously we fly apart, we inevitably fly together again just as fast. No one understands it, but you two are pretty much the same." "Check. Just one more condition, then, and we can pull those women of ours apart." Belle and Fow were still staring at each other, both still sealed tight. "The first time Fow Talaho starts throwing her weight at me, I'm not going to wait for you to take care of her. I'm going to give her the surprise of her life." "It'd tickle me silly if it could be done." Delcamp smiled and was perfectly frank. "But the man doesn't live that can do it. How would you go about trying it?" "Set your block solid." Delcamp did so, and through that block, the supposedly impenetrable shield of a prime operator, Garlock insinuated a probe. He did not crack the screen or break it down by force. He neutralized and counterphased, painlessly and almost imperceptibly, its every component and layer. "Like this," Garlock said in the depths of the Margonian's mind. "My God! You can do that?" "If I tell her, this deep, to play ball or else, do you think she'd need 2 treatments?" "She certainly oughtn't to. This makes you Galactic Admiral, no question. I'd thought, of course, of trying you out for Top Gunther, but this settles that. We will support you, sir, wholeheartedly, and my heartfelt thanks for coming here. I have your permission, then, to give Fow a little discipline when she starts rocking the boat?" "I wish you would, sir. I'm not too easy to get along with, I admit, but I've tried to meet her a lot more than halfway. She's just too damned cocky for anybody's good." "Check. I wish somebody would come along who could knock hell out of Belle." Then aloud, "Belle, Delcamp and I have the thing going. Do you want in on it?" Delcamp spoke to Fow, and the 2 women slowly, reluctantly lowered their shields to match those of the men. "Your Galaxian shaking of the handshake, I mean, is very good," Delcamp said, and he and Garlock shook vigorously. Then the crossed pairs, and lastly the 2 girls, although neither put much effort into the gesture. "Snap out of it, Belle," Garlock sent a tight-beamed thought. "She isn't going to bite you." "She's been trying to, damn her, and I'm going to bite her right back. See if I don't." Garlock called the meeting to order, and all 4 sat down. The Tellurians lighted cigarettes, and the others, who, to the Earthling's surprise, also smoked, assembled and lit 2 peculiar-looking things halfway between pipe and cigarette, and both pairs of smokers, after a few tentative tests, agreed in not liking at all the other's taste in tobacco. "You know, of course, of the trip we took yesterday?" Garlock asked. "Yes," Delcamp admitted. We read Comma Flernoi. We know of the 70 planets, but nothing of what you found. Okay. Of the 70 planets, all have op fields, and all have 2 or more operators. One planet has 44 of them. Only 61 of the planets, however, have primes old enough for us to detect. Each of these worlds has 2 and only 2 primes, one male and one female, and on each world the 2 primes are of approximately the same age. On 15 of these worlds the primes are not yet adult. On the 46 remaining worlds, the primes are young adults, from pretty much like us 4 down to considerably younger. None of these couples is married for family. None of the girls has as yet had a child or is now pregnant. Now, as to the information circulating all over this planet about us, part of it is false. Part of it is misleading, to impress the military mind. Thus, the fact is that the Pleiades, as far as we know, is the only starship in the whole galaxy. Also, the information is very incomplete, especially as to the all-important fact that we were lost in space for some time before we discovered that the only possible controller of the Gunther drive is the human mind. What? And argument raged until Garlock stopped it by declaring that he would prove it in the Margonian's own ship. Then Garlock and Bell together went on to explain and to describe, not even hinting, of course, that they had ever been outside the galaxy or had even thought of trying to do so, their concept of what the Galaxian societies of the galaxy would and should do, or what the Galaxian service could, should, and would become, the service to which they both intended to devote their lives. It wasn't even in existence yet, of course. Fao and Deggy were the only other primes they had ever talked to in their lives. That was why they were so eager to help the Margonians get their ship built. The more starships there were at work, the faster the service would grow into a really tremendous— "Fao's getting ready to blow her top," Delcamp flashed Garlock a tight-beamed thought. "If I were doing it, I'd have to start right now. I'll let her work up a full head of steam, then smack her bow-legged. Cheers, brother. I hope you can handle her." Organization. Then, when enough ships were working and enough Galaxian societies were rolling, there would be the regional organizations and the Galactic Council. "So, on a one-planet basis, and right out of your own little fat head," Fao sneered, "you have set yourself up as Grand High Chief Mogul, and all the rest of us are to crawl up to you on our bellies and kiss your feet?" "If that's the way you want to express it, yes. However, I don't know how long I personally will be in the pilot's bucket. As I told you, I will enforce the basic tenet that Top Gunther is top boss, man, woman, snake, fish, or monster." "Top Gunther be damned!" Fao blazed. "I don't and won't take orders from any man, in hell or in heaven or on this earth or on any planet of any—" "Fao!" Delcamp exclaimed. "Please keep still. Please." "Let her rave," Garlock said coldly. "This is just a 3-year-old baby's tantrum. If she keeps it up, I'll give her the damnedest jolt she ever got in all her spoiled life." Bell whistled sharply to call Fao's attention, then tight-beamed a thought. "If you've got any part of a brain, slick chick, you'd better start using it. The boyfriend not only plays rough, but he doesn't bluff." "To hell with all that!" Fao rushed on. "We don't have anything to do with your organization. Go on back home or anywhere else you want to. We'll finish our own ship and build our own organization and run it to suit ourselves. We'll—" "That's enough of that." Garlock penetrated her shield as easily as he had the man's, and held her in lock. "You are not going to wreck this project. You will start behaving yourself right now, or I'll spread your mind wide open for Bell and Deggy to look at and see exactly what kind of a half-baked jerk you are. If that doesn't work, I'll put you into a Gunther-blocked cell aboard the Pleiades and keep you there until the ship is finished and we leave Margonia. How do you want it?" Fa was shocked as she had never been shocked before. At first she tried viciously to fight, but finding that useless against the appalling power of the mind holding hers, she stopped struggling and began really to think. "That's better. You've got what it takes to think with. Go ahead and do it." And Phao Talaho did have it. Plenty of it, she learned. "I'll be good," she said finally. "Honestly, I'm ashamed, really, but after I got started I couldn't stop. But I can now, I'm sure." "I'm sure you can, too. I know exactly how it is. All us primes have to get hell knocked out of us before we amount to a whoop in Hades. Deggy got his one way, I got mine another, you got yours this way. No, neither of the others knows anything about this conversation, and they won't. This is strictly between you and me." "I'm awfully glad of that. And I think yes, damn you, thanks." Garlock released her, and after a few sobs, a couple of gulps, and a dabbing at her eyes with an inadequate handkerchief, she said, "I'm sorry, Deggy, and you too, Belle. I'll try not to act like such a fool any more." Delcamp and Belle both stared at Garlock. Belle licked her lips. No comment, he thought at the man, and to Belle, "She just took a beating. Will you sheathe your claws and take a lot of pains to be extra nice to her the rest of the day?" "Why, surely. I'm always nice to anybody who is nice to me." "Says you," Garlock replied skeptically, and all four went to work as though nothing had happened. They went through the shops and the almost finished ship. They studied blueprints. They met all the operators and discussed generators and fields of force and mathematics and paraphysics and guntherics. They argued so hotly over mental control that Garlock had James bring the Pleiades over to New Christened Galaxian Field so that he could prove his point then and there. Entlor and Holson came along this time, as well as the Comoff, and all three were nonplussed and surprised to see each member of the crackpot group hurl the huge starship from one solar system to any other one desired, apparently merely by thinking about it. And the crackpots were extremely surprised to find themselves hopelessly lost in uncharted galactic wildernesses every time they did not think, definitely and positively, of one specific destination. Then Garlock took a chance. He had to take it sometime. He might just as well do it now. "See if you can hit Andromeda, Deggy," he suggested. While Belle, James, and Lola held their breaths, Delcamp tried. The starship went toward the huge nebula, but stopped at the last suitable planet on the galaxy's rim. "Can you hit Andromeda?" Delcamp asked, more than half jealously, and Belle tensed her muscles. "Never tried it," Garlock said easily. "I suppose, though, since you couldn't kick the old girl out of our good old home galaxy, she'll just sit right here for me, too." He went through the motions, and the Pleiades did sit right there, which was exactly what he had told her to do, and everybody, even the crackpots, breathed more easily. And Belle was nice to Phao. She didn't use her claws even once all day, and, just before quitting time, "Does did he ever, well, sort of knock you around?" Phao asked. "I'll say he hasn't." Belle's nostrils flared slightly at the mere thought. "I'd stick a knife into him, the big jerk." "Oh, I didn't mean physically." "Through my blocks? A prime's blocks? Don't be ridiculous, Phao." "What do you mean, ridiculous?" Phao snapped. "You tried my blocks. What did they feel like to you? Mosquito netting?" "What I thought was... Oh, all he really said was that all primes had to have hell knocked out of them before they could be any good. That he had had it one way, Deggy another, and me a third." "I see. You haven't had yours yet." "I certainly haven't. And if he ever tries it, I'll—" "Oh, he won't. He couldn't very well, because after you're married, it would— Did the big lug tell you I was going to marry him? Of course not. No fringes even. But who else are you going to marry? If the whole universe was clear full of the finest men imaginable, pure dreamboats no less, can you even conceive of you marrying any one of them except him? I'm not going to marry anybody ever. No? You with your Prime's mind and your Prime's body not have any children? And you tell me not to be ridiculous? That stopped Belle cold, but she wouldn't admit it. Instead, I don't get it. What did he do to you anyway? Fowle's block set itself so tight that it took her a full minute to soften it down enough for even the thinnest thought to get through. That's something nobody will ever know. But anyway, unless you find another Prime as strong as Clee is, and I don't really think there are any, do you? Of course there aren't. There's only one of his class anywhere. He's it, Belle said with profound conviction. That makes it tough for you. You'll have the toughest job imaginable. The very toughest. I know. Huh? What job? Since Clee won't do it for you, and since nobody else can, you'll have to just simply knock the hell out of yourself. And in Garlock's room that night, getting ready for bed, Belle asked suddenly, Clee, what in hell did you do to Fowl Talaho? Nothing much. She's a mighty good egg, really. Could you do it, whatever it was, to me? I don't know. I never tried it. Would you, then, if I asked you to? No. Why not? Answer that yourself. And it was nothing much, it says here in fine print. But I think I know just about what it was, don't I? I wouldn't be surprised. You knocked hell out of yourself, didn't you? I lied to her about that. I'm still trying to. So I've got to do it to myself. And I haven't started yet? Check. But you're several years younger than I am, you know. Belle thought it over for a minute, then stubbed out her cigarette and shrugged her shoulders. No sale. Put it back on the shelf. I like me better the way I am. That is, I think I do. In a way, though, I'm sorry, Clee, darling. Darling? Something new has been added. I wish you really meant that, Ace. I'm still Ace after what I just said? I'm glad, Clee. Ace is ever so much nicer than chum. Ace, the top of the deck. You are and always will be. As for meaning it, I wish I didn't. Ready for bed, Belle was much more completely and much less revealingly dressed than during her working hours. She slid into bed beside him, pulled the covers up to her chin, and turned off the light by glancing at the switch. If I thought anything could ever come of it, though, I'd do it if I had to pound myself unconscious with a club. But I wouldn't be here then either. I'd scoot into my own room so fast my head would spin. You wouldn't have to. You wouldn't be here. I wouldn't at that. That's one of the things I like so much about you. But honestly, Clee, seriously, screens down honestly, can you see any possible future in it? No, neither of us would give that much. Neither of us can. And there's nothing one-sided about it. I'm no more fit to be a husband than you are to be a wife. And God help our children, they'd certainly need it. We'd never have any. I can't picture us living in marriage for 9 months without committing at least mayhem. Why, in just the little time we've been paired, how many times have you thrown me out of this very room with the fervent hope that I'd drown in deep space before you ever saw me again? At a guess, about the same number of times as you have stormed out under your own power, slamming the door so hard it sprung half the seams of the ship, and swearing you'd slice me up into sandwich meat if I ever so much as looked at you again. That's what I mean. But how come we got off on this subject, I wonder? Because when we aren't fighting, like now, it's purely wonderful. So I'll say it again. Good night, Clee, darling. Good night, Ace. In the dark his lips sought hers and found them. The fervor of her kiss was not only much more intense than any he had ever felt before, it was much, very much more intense than Belle Bellamy had either wanted it or intended it to be. Next morning, at the workman's hour of 8 o'clock, the four Tellurians appeared in the office of Margonia's Galaxian Field. "The first thing to do, Deggy, is to go over in detail your blueprints for the generators and the drive," Garlock said. "I suppose so. The funny pictures, eh?" Delclamp had learned much the previous day. His own performance with the Pleiades had humbled him markedly. "By no means, my friend," Garlock said cheerfully. "While your stuff isn't exactly like ours, it couldn't be hardly. The field is so big and so new, that alone is no reason for it not to work. James can tell you. He's the solar system's top engineer. What do you think, Jim?" "What I saw in the ship yesterday will work. What few of the prints I saw yesterday will fabricate, and the fabrications will work. The main trouble with this project, it seems to me, is that nobody's building the ship." "What do you mean by that, Crack?" Fowl blazed. "Just that. You're a bunch of prima donnas, each doing exactly as he pleases. So some of the stuff is getting done 3 or 4 times in 3 or 4 different ways, while a lot of it isn't getting done at all." "Such as?" Delclamp demanded, and— "Well, if you don't like the way we are doing things, you can—" Fowl began. "Just a minute, everybody." Lola came in with a disarming grin. "How much of that is hindsight, Jim? You've built one, you know, and from all accounts, progress wasn't nearly as smooth as your story can be taken to indicate." "You've got a point there, Lola," Garlock agreed. "We slid back 2 steps for every 3 we took forward." "Well, maybe," James admitted. "So why don't you, Fow and Deggy, put Jim in charge of construction?" Fow threw back her silvery head and glared, but Delcamp jumped at the chance. "Would you, Jim?" "Sure, unless Miss Talaho objects." "She won't." Delclamp's eyes locked with Fow's, and Fow kept still. "Thanks immensely, Jim, and I know what you mean." He went over to a cabinet of wide flat drawers and brought back a sheaf of drawings. Not blueprints, but original drawings in pencil. "Such as this. I haven't even got it designed yet, to say nothing of building it." James began to leaf through the stack of drawings. They were full of erasures, redrawings, and such notations as "See sheets 17B, 21A, and 27F." Halfway through the pile, he paused, turned backward 3 sheets, and studied for minutes. Then, holding that one sheet by a corner, he went rapidly through the rest of the stack. "This is it," he said then, pulling the one sheet out and spreading it flat. "What we call Unit 8, the heart of the drive." Then, tight-beamed to Garlock, "This is a thing that you designed in toto and that I never could understand any part of. All I did was build it. It must generate those prime fields." "Probably," Garlock flashed back. "I didn't understand it any too well myself. How does it look?" "He isn't even close. He's got only half of the constants down, and half of the ones he has got down are wrong. Look at this mess here." "I'll take your word for it. I haven't your affinity for blueprints, you know, or your eidetic memory for them." "Do you want me to give him the whole works?" "We'll have to, I think, or the ship might not work at all." "Could be. But how about intergalactic hops?" "He couldn't do it with the Pleiades, so he won't be able to do it with this. Besides, if we change it in any particular, he might. You see, I don't know very much more about Unit 8 than you do." "That could be, too." Then, as though just emerging from his concentration on the drawings, James thought at Delcamp and Fow, but on the open general band. A good many errors and a lot of blanks, but in general you're on the right track. I can finish up this drawing in a couple of hours, and we can build the unit in a couple of days. With that in place, the rest of the ship will go fast. If Miss Talaho wants me to, he concluded pointedly. Oh, I do, Jim, really, I do. At long last, stiff-backed Fow softened and bent. She seized both his hands. If you can, it'd be too wonderful for words. Okay, one question. Why are you building your ship so small? Why, it's plenty big enough for two, Delcamp said. For four in a pinch. Why did you make yours so big? Your main is big enough almost for a convention hall. That's what we figured it might have to be at times, Garlock said. But that's a very minor point. With yours so nearly ready to flit, no change in size is indicated now. But Bell and I have got to have another conference with the Legal Eagle. So if you and Brownie Jim will port whatever you need out of the Pleiades, we'll be on our way. So long. See you in a few days, he added, and the Pleiades vanished, to appear instantaneously high above the stratosphere over what was to become the Galaxian field of Earth. Got a minute, Gene? He sent a thought. For you two primes, as many as you like. We haven't started building or fencing yet, as you suggested, but we have bought all the real estate. So land the ship anywhere out there, and I'll send a jeep out after you. Thanks, but no jeep. Nobody but you knows that we've really got control of the Pleiades, and I want everybody else to keep on thinking it's strictly for the birds. We'll port into your office whenever you say. I say now. In no time at all, the two primes were seated in the private office of Eugene Evans, head of the legal department of the newly reincorporated Galaxian Society of Sol, Inc. Evans was a tall man, slightly thin, slightly stooped, whose thick trifocals did nothing whatever to hide the keenness of his steel-gray eyes. The first thing, Gene, Garlock said, is this employment contract thing. Have you figured out a way to break it? It can't be broken. The lawyer shook his head. Huh? I thought you top-bracket legal eagles could break anything, if you really tried. A good many things, yes, especially if they're long and complicated. The standard employment contract, however, is short, explicit, and ironclad. The employer can discharge the employee for any one of a number of offenses, including insubordination, which, as a matter of fact, the employer himself is allowed to define. On the other hand, the employee cannot quit except for some such fantastic reason as the non-tendering, not non-payment, mind you, but non-tendering of salary. I didn't expect that. It kicks us in the teeth before we get started. Garlock got up, lighted a cigarette, and prowled about the big room. Okay, Jim and I will have to get ourselves fired then. Fired? Bell snorted. Clee, you talk like a man with a paper nose. Who else could run the project? That is, her whole manner changed. He doesn't know I can run it as well as you can, or better, but I could tell him, and maybe you think I wouldn't. You won't have to. Gene, you can start spreading the news that Bell Bellamy is a real, honest-to-God prime operator in every respect. That she knows more about Project Gunther than I do, and could run it better. Ferber undoubtedly knows that Bell and I have been at loggerheads ever since we first met. Spread it thick that we're fighting worse than ever, which, by the way, is the truth. Fighting? Why, you seemed friendly enough. Yeah, we can be friendly for about 15 minutes if we try real hard, as now. The cold fact is, though, that she's just as much 3/4 Hellcat and 1/4 potassium cyanide as she— I like that! Bell stormed. She leapt to her feet, her eyes shooting sparks. All my fault! Why, you self-centered, egotistical, domineering jerk, I could write a book. That's enough. Let it go, please, Evans pleaded. He jumped up, took each of the combatants by a shoulder, sat them down into the chairs they had vacated, and resumed his own seat. The demonstration was eminently successful. I will spread the word through several channels. Chancellor Ferber will get it all, rest assured. And I'll get the job, Bell snapped. And maybe you think I won't take it. Yeah, came Garlock's searing thought. You'd do anything to get it and keep it. Yeah, I do think. Oh? Bell's body stiffened, her face hardened. I've heard stories, of course, but I couldn't quite. But surely he can't be that stupid to think he can buy me like so many pounds of calf liver. He surely is. He does, and it works. That is, if he's ever missed, nobody ever heard of it. But how could a man in such a big job possibly get away with such foul stuff as that? Because all the SSE is interested in is money, and Alonzo P. Ferber is a tremendously able top executive. In the big black and red money books, he's always way, way up in the black, and nobody cares about his conduct. Bell, even though she was already convinced, glanced questioningly at Evans. That's it, Miss Bellamy. That's it in a precise, if somewhat crude, nutshell. That's that, then. But just how, Clee, if he's as smart as you say he is, do you think you can make him fire you? I don't know. Haven't thought about it yet. But I could be pretty insubordinate if I really tried. That's the understatement of the century. I'll devote the imponderable force of the intellect to the problem and check with you later. Now, Jean, about the proposed galactic service, the Council, and so on. What is the reaction? Yours personally and others. My personal reaction is immensely favorable. I think it the greatest advance that humanity has ever made. I have been very cautious, of course, in discussing, or even mentioning the matter, but the reaction of everyone I have sounded, good men, big men in their respective fields, has been as enthusiastic as my own. Good. It won't surprise you, probably, to be told that you are to be this system's counselor, and, if we can swing it, and I think we can, the first president of the Galactic Council. Evans was so surprised that it was almost a minute before he could reply coherently. Then, I am surprised, very much so. I thought, of course, that you yourself would— Far from it, Garlock said positively. I'm not the type. You are. You're better than anyone else of the Galaxians, which means than anyone else, period. With the possible exception of Lola, and she fits better on our exploration team. Check, Bell? Check. For once, I agree with you without reservation. That's a job we can work at all the rest of our lives and scarcely start it. True, indubitably true. I appreciate your confidence in me, and if the vote so falls, I will do whatever I can. We know you will, and thank you. How long will it take to organize? A couple of weeks? And is there anything else we have to cover now? A couple of weeks? Evans was shocked. You are naive indeed, young man, to think anything of this magnitude can even be started in such a short time as that. And yes, there are dozens of matters, hundreds, that should be discussed before I can even start to work intelligently. Hence discussions went on and on and on. It was 3 days before Garlock and Bell ported themselves up to the Pleiades, and the starship displaced itself instantaneously to Margonia. Meanwhile, on Margonia, James the Ninth went directly to the heart of his job by leading Lola and Fao into Del Clamp's office and setting up its Gunther blocks. You said you want me to build your starship. Okay, but I want you both, Fao especially, to realize exactly what that means. I know what to do and how to do it. I can handle your operators and get the job done. However, I can't handle either of you, since you both out-Gunther me, and I'm not going to try. But there can't be two bosses on any one job, to say nothing of 3 or 17. So either I run the job or I don't. If either of you steps in, I step out and don't come back in. And remember that you're not doing us any favors, it's strictly vice versa." "Jim," Lola protested. Fow's hackles were very evidently on the rise. Delclamp's face was hardening. "Don't be so rough, Jim, please. That's no way to—" "If you can pretty this up, pet, I'll be glad to have you say it for me. Here's what you have to work on. If I do the job, they'll have their starship in a few weeks. The way they've been going, they won't have it in 25 years. And the only way to get that bunch out there to really work is to tell each one of them to cooperate or else, and enforce the or else." "But they'd quit," Delclamp protested. "They'll all quit." "With suspension or expulsion from the society the consequences? Hardly," James said. "But you wouldn't do that. You couldn't." "I wouldn't?" "Of course he wouldn't," Lola put in soothingly, "except as a very last resort. And even at worst, Jim could build it almost as easily with common labor. You primes don't really have to have any operators at all, you know, but all your operators together would be perfectly helpless without at least one prime." "How come? And in what way?" Delclamp and Fow demanded together. "Oh, didn't you know? After the ship's built and the fields are charged and so on, everything has to be activated. The 101 things that make it so nearly alive. And that is strictly a prime's job. Even Jim can't do it." "I see. Or rather, I don't see at all," Fow said thoughtfully. She was no longer either excited or angry. "A few weeks against 25 years. What do you think of his time estimate, Deg, my dear?" "I hadn't thought it would take nearly that long. But this activation thing scares me. Nothing in my theory even hints at any such thing. So, if there's so much I don't know yet, even in theory, it would take a long time. Maybe I'd never get it." "Well, anyway, I want our celestial queen done in weeks, not years," Fow said, extending her hand to James and shaking his vigorously. "So I promise not to interfere a bit. If I feel any such urge coming on, I'll dash home and lock myself up in a closet until it dies. Fair enough?" Since Fow really meant it, that was fair enough. For a whole day, James did nothing except study blueprints, going over in detail and practically memorizing every drawing that had been made. He then went over the ship, studying minutely every part, plate, member, machine, and instrument that had been installed. He noted what each man and woman was doing and what they intended to do. He went over material on hand and material on order, paying particular attention to times of delivery. He then sent a few, surprisingly few, telegrams. Finally, he called all 14 operators together. He told them exactly what the revised situation was and exactly what he was going to do about it. He invited comments. There was, of course, a riot of protest. But, in view of what James had said anent suspensions and expulsions from the Galaxian Society, not one of them actually did quit. 4 of them, however, did appeal to Delcamp, considerably to his surprise, to oust the interloper and put things back to where they had been. But they did not get much satisfaction. "James says that he can finish building this starship in a few weeks," Delclamp told them flatly. "Specifically, 3 weeks, if we can get the special stuff made fast enough. Fow and I believe him. Therefore, we have put him in full charge. He will remain in charge unless and until he fails in performance. You are all good friends of Fow's and mine, and we hope that all of you will stay with the project. If, however, we must choose now between you, any one of you or all of you, and James, there is no need to tell you what the choice will be." Wherefore all 14 went back to work, grudgingly at first and dragging their feet. In a very few hours, however, it became evident to all that James did in fact know what he was doing, and that the work was going faster and smoother than ever before. Whereupon all opposition and all malingering disappeared. They were operators, and they were all intensely interested in their ship. Morale was at a high. Thus, when the Pleiades landed beside the now seething Celestial Queen, Garlock found James with feet on desk, hands in pockets, and scanner on head, doing, apparently, nothing at all. Nevertheless, he was a very busy man. "Hey, Jim!" A soprano shriek of thought emanated from a gorgeous 17-year-old blonde. "I can't read this funny picture. It's been folded too many times. Where does this lead go to?" "Data insufficient. Careful, Vingy. I'd hate to have to send you back to school." "'Scuse please, Junior. Unit 6, Subassembly T-9, Terminal 4. From said terminal there's a lead. B sub something or other goes somewhere. Where?" "B sub 4. It goes to Unit 7, Subassembly Q-3, Terminal 2. And watch your insulation. That's a mighty hot lead." "Uh-huh, I got that. Double sync mil, class Albert Dog Kittens. Thanks, boss." "Hi, Jim," Garlock said. Then to Delcamp, "I see you're rolling." "He's rolling, you mean." Delcamp had not yet recovered fully from a state of near shock. So that's what an eidetic memory is. He knows every nut, bolt, lead, and coil in the ship. More than that, he's checking every move everybody makes. When they're done, you won't have to just hope everything was put together right. You'll know it was. Jim was their man. And Fowl sidled over toward Belle. There was something new about the silver-haired girl, Belle decided instantly. The difference was slight. Belle couldn't put her finger on it at first. She seemed quieter, softer, more subdued. No, definitely. More feminine? No, that would be impossible. More adult? Belle hated to admit it, even to herself, but that was what it was. "Dag and I got married day before yesterday," Fowl confided via tight beam. "Oh, so you're pregnant?" "Of course. I saw to that the first thing. I knew you'd want to be the first one to know. Oh, isn't it wonderful?" She seized Belle's arm and hugged it ecstatically against her side. "Just too perfectly marvelous for anything?" "Oh, I'm sure it is, and I'm so happy for you, Fowl." And it would have taken the mind of a Garlock to perceive anything either false or forced in thought or bearing. Nevertheless, when Belle went into Garlock's room that night, storm signals were flying high in her almost topaz eyes. "Fowl Talaho Delcamp is pregnant!" she stormed, "and it's all your fault!" He demurred, trying to snap her out of her obviously savage mood. "Not me, Ace. Not a chance in the world. It was Deggy." You weasel! You know very well, Clee Garlock, what I meant. If you hadn't given her that treatment, she'd have kept on fighting with him, and they wouldn't have been married and had any children for positively years. So now she'll have the first double-prime baby, and it ought to be mine. I'm older than she is. Our group is way ahead of theirs. We have the first and only starship. And then you do that. And you wouldn't give me that treatment. Oh, no, just to her, that bleached blonde. I'd like to strangle you to death with my own bare hands." What a hell of a logic! Garlock had been trying to keep his own temper in leash, but the leash was slipping. "Assume I tried to work on you. Assume I succeeded. What would you be? What would I have? What age do you think this is? That of the Vikings? When S.O.P. in getting a wife was to beat her unconscious with a club and drag her into the longboat by her hair? Hardly. I do not want and will not have a conquered woman. nor a spoiled, rotten, mentally retarded brat." "You unbearable, conceited, overbearing jerk! Why, I'd rather—" "Get out, and this time stay out." Bell got out, and if door and frame had not been built of super steel, both would have been wrecked by the blast of energy she loosed in closing the door behind her. In her own room, with Gunther blocks full on, she threw herself face down on the bed and cried as she had not cried since she was a child. And finally, without even taking off her clothes, she cried herself to sleep. End of chapter 7.